Hey guys, it's Reagan and today we are filming a very importante video because guess what? It's the end of the year, so it can only mean one thing. I'm about to talk about my favorite books that I read in 2015. Just to give you a bit of statistics, I read a total of 71 books this year, and I'm going to be talking about 11. I was trying for 10, but I just couldn't do it, so it's going to be 11. So let's just go ahead and get started. The first novel on my list I'm going to talk about is Tatiana and Alexander. This is book 2 to the Bronze Horseman historical fiction trilogy. This is a epic romance trilogy that I have read over the past 2 years, and I've really enjoyed. Specifically, this novel takes place in Russia during World War II, and it follows our main characters, Tatiana, who's beautiful, young, naive, innocent, and a soldier, Alexander, who has a much more complicated past than he initially seems. It's about them falling in love, and it's honestly addicting. The reason why this book made my list versus the last book not making my list last year is because I felt like there was a lot of independent character growth in this particular novel that I really appreciated. I just felt like specifically the characterizations of these two characters were just a lot more fleshed out and a lot more rich in this one, and that's why I really loved this novel so much, and I can't wait to continue on with the third book. If you love historical fiction or romance, I highly recommend this. They are very long, but they read so quickly. You fly through them, so this is the first book on my list. Next up, we have another historical fiction novel, but this time YA, and that is Between Shades of Grey by Ruta Sepetys. This is another novel set during World War II and kind of in Russia. It follows the Lithuanian refugee exodus that Stalin did of a whole bunch of Lithuanians that were kind of political antagonists to his regime, and it follows a young girl and her family as they are basically kicked out and arrested out of Lithuania and sent to 2 camps. And it is their story of their journey. It is harrowing, it is challenging at times, but honestly, it is a very important book and a particular topic that I have not read very much about. I don't think Lithuanian refugees are talked about in school very often. I could be wrong on that, but at least they weren't in my school. It was just a really powerful and well-written young adult novel following a very tragic piece of history, and I thought it was just very well executed. It stuck with me, and it's definitely a book I will want to reread and revisit in the future. I appreciated that this book didn't try to cover things up. It embraced the tragedy and the hardship head on and made the reader also have to face it itself. This, of course, led the reader to so uncomfortable times, but again, I just felt like it was a really important read, and that's why it made my list. And next up, we have a science fiction novel, and that is The Martian by Andy Weir. This is a novel that I absolutely devoured. It was so fantastically funny, and it came out as a movie this year. But specifically, this novel follows our main character who is on a mission to Mars. Everything is going as planned, but then a massive sandstorm hits and him and his entire crew have to evacuate immediately. During this evacuation, some complications happen, making the whole crew believe our main character is actually dead. Surprise! He is very much alive, and now he has to figure out how to survive on Mars, not for like a week, but for like years. Mars is really far away. The thing about this novel that I just really appreciated was its balance of science and humor. You wouldn't think a novel following one guy like doing all these complex scientific experiments would be funny, but it's absolutely hilarious. Watney is so funny, and that is why you love this book, because the character is just so unbelievably like he's just a great hero to root for, and it's just absolutely hilarious. Again, the other thing I mentioned, I just love the science in this. I'm not an engineer at all. I'm a history and advertising major in school, but the way that the author explained the complex science and engineering in this novel was very approachable and also fascinating. I kind of felt like I could be an astronaut. I was like, yeah, you know, just release the carbon dioxide and light it on fire and make water. That's not how you do it, but it was amazing, and I just flew through this, and I also love the movie. It was a great book. I'm so glad I read it this year, so next on my list is a fan favorite, and that is going to be, of course, Queen of Shadows by Sarah J. Maas. I debated quite a bit about having this on my list, but ultimately I loved the book, I loved the series, and I couldn't not include it amongst all these other fantastic novels. This, of course, is the 4th novel to the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. I obviously can't go very much into the plot, but if you're not aware, this series follows a renowned assassin, and in the very beginning of the first novel, she is taken out of prison and is told if she wins this competition to become the King's Champion, she will win her freedom ultimately. So that's how the first novel starts. But I will say, and a lot of people will also say, when you get to the fourth novel, so much has happened and the world has grown so much, and that's why this book is really great. It's kind of the turning point for a lot of things. Finally, a lot of action happened and the politics and the plot are moving forward at light speed, and this novel was like the tipping stone for all of that. It's huge, but it read so quickly because there's just like one page after another, you're just like, what is happening? Again, if you're interested on spoilerly thoughts, if you have read this book, I have done a spoiler discussion, which I will leave down below, but for now, just know Throne of Glass is an amazing series, and hence why it made one of my favorite books of the year list. Next up, we have what? Another historical fiction novel? Yes, I like historical fiction. The next novel I'm going to talk about is The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This is another historical fiction fantasy-esque novel set in Barcelona post-World War II. It follows a boy who is taken to this place called the Library of Lost Books by his father, and he's told by his father to take one book and protect it with his life. He picks a novel called The Shadow of the Wind, and he reads it and is fascinated by it, and he is drawn to find other books by this author as well. He finds, however, that all of this author's works are slowly being destroyed systematically one by one. Jump to a little bit in the future, he is drawn by this mystery and wants to revisit it and figure out what in the world is going on. But then he starts to realize his life is starting to mirror the novel itself. This novel is kind of amazing. First off, the writing is absolutely beautiful, but the thing that really drove me through this book so quickly was the mystery itself. It is definitely a book for book lovers, but it's also eerie. Like I said, as the character starts to realize the similarities between his life and the novel that he loves so much, you are like, what the crap is going on? And you have to figure out the ending. Personally, I didn't see it coming and I really enjoyed that. This is definitely a novel that will keep you on the edge of your seats, and that is why I loved it so much, and that is why I made the list. Of course, all these books are amazing, that's why they're on this list, right? Next up, I'm going to be talking about The Enchanted by Renee Denfeld. This is a very short literary fiction novel that honestly just stuck with me for a variety of reasons. This is a magical realism novel following a personified prison set in a kind of unspecified date. The narrator in this story is omnipresent. That's how you say that, right? And he accounts for all the lives of this prison, including the prison of itself, from a disavowed priest to a woman working to help get men off death row by investigating in their past lives. The story is absolutely fascinating and riveting, very, very dark, and honestly gave me some very new perspective on prisons themselves. I haven't read any fiction or non-fiction following death row or prisons, and it was fascinating. But definitely the strongest part of this book, and the way it's the reason why it stuck with me for so long, is the writing. It's absolutely captivating, dark, gritty, and there were lines honestly that left me breathless. I had to stop and think. The reason why this novel really made my list is because of the amount of thinking I did after I finished it. I was like, I finished the novel and I sat in bed and I thought about it for hours, and because it stuck with me so much, obviously it had to make my list. It's dark, it's gritty, it's harrowing, but definitely worth the read. It's also beautiful, so there you go. So on my list is another literary fiction, but a little less depressing, and that is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. This novel is definitely a fan favorite, I feel, amongst the people who have read it, because it's just so much fun and it's just so interesting. This novel has a lot of different viewpoints and a lot of different time periods, but everything ultimately is very connected, which makes it so interesting. It follows the world on the eve of the world ending, essentially, because a contagion is killing everyone, and it also follows a group of individuals who have survived the contagion, and they are now a traveling troupe of theater goers. They, like perform Macbeth and Shakespearean plays for entertainment of this new world. Again, the narrative of the story switches back and forth between these two time periods, and it's just something that just draws you in completely. It kind of has this idea that humanity is very connected, but in a very entertaining way. It's not so it's not so heavy on like, look at humanity, we're all connected in such fantastic and complex ways. It says that, but in a very entertaining fashion, I guess. You read through this so quickly, and it's funny, it's interesting, and honestly the suspense of how things are going to connect together propels the story forward and the plot forward very well. I loved this book. It's amazing, and I want more people to read it, so That's your job now, okay? Next up is a novel I read at the beginning of last year. I think it was the first book I completed in the year 2015, and it has stuck with me all year because I absolutely freaking love it. And it is The First 15 Lives of Harry August by Claire North. Now this is a science fiction novel that doesn't really deal with space travel, but instead deals with the concept of time. It follows our main character, Harry August, who has a very peculiar ability, and that is to essentially, he lives his life, he dies, he wakes up and lives his life all over again, but with all the past memories he had in his previous lives. So obviously he has a lot of opportunity to learn a lot of stuff. But on his eve, I believe, of his 11th life or something along those lines, someone comes to him and he's dying. And someone tells him, the world is ending and you need to figure out why. This book is amazing. I absolutely loved this book. It blew my mind, and it dealt with time travel, I felt very well. Sometimes time travel stuff can be really confusing to me, like it's hard for me to grasp, but I felt like this dealt with it very well. It explained it thoroughly, so all of it kind of made sense and you kind of had to buy into it. The thing that I felt that this book had like strongest going for it was the character Harry August himself. He was hilarious, dry, British guy, and in fact, if you like audiobooks, this is a great book to read an audiobook for. It's just so good. I really love this novel. In fact, I already want to read it again. It's just really great. It's so entertaining, and it has a really, I don't want to spoil anything, but it has a really interesting protagonist antagonist relationship and situation. It's fascinating. It's so good. It would be such a cool movie too. I'm not even gonna lie. Like this is an amazing book. Next up we have my favorite fantasy series that I'm caught up on this year. Not my favorite fantasy book I've read per se, but one where I've caught up and I love it. And that is the Queen of the Tearling trilogy by Erica Johansson. I read the first 2 books of this trilogy this year and fell in love. The Queen of the Tearling is a fantastic young adult hybrid fantasy series that I just loved. It follows our main character Kelsey as she comes to age at the age of 17 and she's forced to kind of regain her kingdom. This novel is very political heavy and it has amazing strong female characters who are independent and just absolutely amazing. It has a very interesting timeline. Basically, it is kind of a regressed future society, meaning it is in the future and it's fantasy, they have magic and all these things, and yet they make references to our current time, like Harry Potter is referenced and things along those lines. It's very cool. And the second book definitely delves into world more, so if you're like, read the first one and you're like, but I want more world building, you get the world building later. I loved this series so much. Perhaps it has some predictable plot points, but I literally don't care because I loved everything about it, and that's why it made my list. It's so good, and it's gonna be a movie with Emma Watson in it, so what else is there to say? We are officially in the home stretch at the last 2 books, my favorite 2 books of this year, and the first one of course being Redeployment by Phil Clay. This of course won the National Book Award in the year 2014, and for very good reason. This is a collection of short stories written by a man who actually fought in the current Afghan wars, and it's just about a lot of different perspectives of a lot of different types of soldiers in the war. The reason why I really enjoyed this book is because of my civilian perspective. I have never been in the military. I don't really have anyone in my family that's been in the military. So I don't really have a lot of perspective on any type of experience of people in the military, and this novel kind of gave me some perspective, which I really appreciated. It was just, at times it was very difficult to read. It brought up some amazing points that I have never even thought about. I just think it's a really important novel that a lot more people should and need to be reading, because it just opens a very interesting and important discussion that I think a lot of us need to have. It was just really good. It's also short and it's a quick read, and again it offers a lot of different perspectives from a lot of different types of people. I just think a lot of people get a lot out of it, and that's why it's made my number 2 spot, because I still think about it, I still recommend it. It's just a really fantastic novel. And my favorite book of the year I read last month, and really shouldn't be a surprise if you think about it kind of a little bit, and that is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. I finally read it, and yes, I loved it. Seeing how it's my favorite book of the year. This is the first book to Patrick Rothfuss's epic fantasy trilogy. It follows a man in the start of the novel. He's basically in a tavern and he's chronicling his life for a chronicler, he's called. And the first novel follows this man's life from his early years to about his teens when he's at university studying. It is just amazing. There's some, it was like, felt like home, it was it just felt really lovely. I just had a lot of great feelings while reading it. And all of that aside, of course, the writing was fantastic, the plot was divine, I was enthralled the entire way through, and honestly the tropes that were present in the story are some of my favorite. I love the boy genius who's poor and has to work his way through university with his cleverness and his wits about him. I love it. I love it all. It's amazing. It might be long, but trust me, you will love it. The writing is also engaging and very approachable. It's not like George R.R. Martin, and it was just so good. I loved it. It's so good. It was so good. That's why it's my favorite book of the year, people. Alrighty guys, those are my top books of the year 2015. Please let me know down below some of your favorite books of the year, as I would love to know, because this is the time of the year where I get all of my book recommendations, where I'm like, oh, I missed that, I need to read it. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please comment, like, subscribe. I've never said that before in my videos. I don't know why I'm starting with it now. But anyway, I will see you guys soon with another video soon. Goodbye!